The cold doesn't ask permission before it kills you. It simply waits, patient as a predator, for your defenses to crumble. Then it moves in, crystallizing your blood and shutting down your organs with merciless efficiency. By the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. I know this because I've nearly died from exposure twice in the 3 years since I lost everything. The third time won't be far off if this Boston winter keeps tightening its grip. My name is Daniel Reeves. Once I had a life, construction work that paid decent wages, a small but clean apartment in Dorchester, even a woman named Elaine who said she loved me. We talked about marriage, kids, a house someday, normal dreams, achievable dreams. Then came the accident at the Harrington Towers project downtown. 16 stories up on steel beams, a moment's inattention, a 30-foot fall onto concrete. The doctors rebuilt my shattered leg with titanium rods and screws. The pain management specialist prescribed oxycodone. The insurance company fought the claim. The construction company let me go. The pills became more important than rent. Elaine tried to help until she couldn't anymore. The rest played out like a song so common among the homeless that we don't even need to compare notes. Tonight, December 18th, found me huddled beneath the Franklin Street Bridge, my usual spot when temperatures plummeted below freezing. The stone retained some heat from the day, and the angle of the structure blocked the worst of the wind coming off the Charles River. I'd arranged my worldly possessions with practiced efficiency. Cardboard beneath me for insulation, sleeping. Bag rated for 20 degrees, stolen from an REI last winter, my most valuable possession. Layers of newspaper between the thin blankets I'd scrounged from St. Anthony's shelter. The sleet had started around sunset, ice pellets rat-tatting against the concrete overhead. I'd skipped the evening meal at the shelter to secure this spot before anyone else claimed it. My stomach complained, but hunger was an old companion. The cold was the real enemy. Just gotta make it till morning, I muttered to myself, shivering violently as the temperature continued to drop. Talking aloud was a habit I'd picked up living on the streets. It reminded me I was still here, still human, even when no one else treated me that way. The watch on my wrist, my father's Timex, the one thing I hadn't pawned or sold, read 9:37 p.m. The battery had died months ago, the hands frozen in place, but I kept it anyway. Some things you hold on to, even when they've outlived their purpose. Below me, the Charles River churned, black and dangerous, swollen from the recent rain and partially frozen near the banks. Ice flows drifted in the center current like miniature, ghostly rafts. The city lights reflected off the water's surface, wavering and distorted. Boston, looking at its own warped reflection. Traffic had thinned as the weather worsened. Occasional headlights swept across the underside of the bridge. As cars passed overhead, the rumble of tires on wet pavement a constant background noise. I'd learned to tune it out, the same way I'd learned to ignore the smell of my own unwashed body or the persistent ache in my badly healed leg. I was drifting into that twilight state between wakefulness and sleep when I heard it, tires screeching. The desperate sound of rubber fighting for traction on ice. My eyes snapped open. A horn blared, long and panicked. Then came the sickening crunch of metal impacting concrete, the tinkling cascade of shattering glass, and a scream. High-pitched, terrified, cut short by a massive splash. I scrambled to my feet, leg protesting sharply, and limped to the edge of my concrete sanctuary. Through the sleet and darkness, I could just make out the broken section of guardrail at the bridge's edge where a vehicle had smashed through. Below, in the frigid water, taillights glowed red beneath the surface, already beginning to sink. "Hey, I shouted, my voice echoing off the stone. "Hey, anybody there? Can you hear me?" No response. Just the howling wind and the steady patter of sleet. The rational part of my brain, the survivor's instinct honed by 3 harsh years on the streets, told me to stay put, to yell for help, to let someone else handle this, someone with a cell phone, proper clothing, training, but there was no one else. Just me, a broken-down former construction worker with nothing left to lose. I shed my outer layers quickly. The waterlogged coat would only drag me down, keeping only my threadbare thermal shirt and jeans. Unlacing my boots with fingers already numb from cold, I set them carefully beside my sleeping bag. If I survived this, I'd need them. The river waited below, black and hungry. I'd been a good swimmer once, before the accident stiffened my leg. Now? I had no idea if I could make it to the car, let alone back again. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, crossing myself instinctively, a childhood habit resurfacing in the face of mortal danger. Then I jumped. The impact drove the air from my lungs. Cold beyond cold engulfed me, so intense it felt like fire. Every cell in my body screamed in protest, urging me to surface, to breathe, to flee this killing environment. I fought the panic, kicking toward the submerged vehicle, my bad leg a dead weight dragging behind me. The car, a silver luxury sedan, was sinking fast, bubbles streaming from the windows as the cabin filled with water. Through the rear window, illuminated by the interior lights that somehow still functioned, I could see her, a young woman, maybe 20 or 21, trapped in the driver's seat. Her face was a mask of pure terror as she pounded frantically on the driver's side window, her long, dark hair floating around her head like seaweed. I reached the car and grabbed the door handle, yanking with all my strength, locked the electronic. Systems were still working, evidenced by the lights, but the doors wouldn't budge. The woman's eyes met mine through the glass, wild with desperation. She mouthed something, "Help me," and pointed repeatedly toward the front of the vehicle. The windshield. It must have cracked on impact. Lungs burning for oxygen, I pushed off from the door and swam around to the front of the rapidly descending vehicle. The windshield had indeed spiderwebbed from the collision, a network of cracks spreading across the glass like a frozen web. I surfaced briefly, gasping in the freezing air, drawing strange warmth back into my chest. Then, with a deep breath that might be my last, I dove again. The car was nearly vertical now, its nose pointing toward the riverbed, the interior almost completely flooded. The woman had abandoned her seatbelt and was pressing herself against the rear window, desperately seeking the last pocket of air as water filled the cabin. I planted my feet against the car's hood and kicked at the damaged windshield with all my remaining strength. The first kick did nothing. The second produced a promising crunch as the cracks widened. With the third, delivered with the desperate force of a drowning man, the glass gave way. Water rushed into the car with increased ferocity, and I had to grab the frame to keep from being swept inside by the current. Reaching through the jagged opening, I felt for the woman. She was flailing wildly now, disoriented, her movements growing sluggish as hypothermia and oxygen deprivation took their toll. Her hands found mine, clutching with surprising strength. I pulled, but something held her back. The seatbelt she'd unfastened had somehow wrapped around her ankle, tethering her to the sinking vehicle. With my lungs screaming for air, I fumbled in the murky water, finally freeing her leg from the restraint. Together we tumbled out through the broken windshield, my arm locked around her waist. Kicking desperately against the pull of the sinking car, I propelled us toward the surface, toward life and air and the painful blessing of another breath. We broke through together, both gasping. She coughed violently, water streaming from her nose and mouth. She was dead weight against me, conscious but barely, her body already surrendering to the cold. "Hold on," I wheezed, my teeth chattering so violently I could barely form words. "I've got you." The current had carried us 15 yards downstream. The shore looked impossibly distant. My limbs were growing numb, responding sluggishly to commands. The cold was working its way to my core now, shutting down non-essential functions, preserving what little heat remained for heart and brain. I rolled onto my back, pulling the woman onto my chest, and began a one-armed backstroke towards shore. My waterlogged clothes dragged at me like anchors. My bad leg was useless now, a frozen appendage I could barely feel. Every stroke was agony. Every breath burned in my raw throat. "Stay with me," I panted as her eyes fluttered closed. "We're almost there. Just stay awake. What's your name?" "Sophia," she managed between chattering teeth. "I'm Daniel," I gasped. "We're going to make it, Sophia. Just hold on." The distance closed. With excruciating slowness, 10 yards, 5, I could no longer feel my extremities. My movements were growing uncoordinated, my thoughts fuzzy, dangerous signs. When my back finally scraped against the rocky riverbed, I nearly wept with relief. I staggered to my feet, water streaming from my clothes, and half dragged, half carried Sophia onto the shore. We collapsed together on the frozen ground, both shivering uncontrollably, our breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. She rolled onto her side, coughing up river water, her elegant wool coat soaked through, her leather boots ruined. Even in this state, I could tell they'd cost more than I'd earned in a month back when I had regular work. "Thank you," she gasped, reaching for my hand. Her fingers were ice against my frozen skin, but her grip was strong. "You saved my life," sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Someone must have seen the accident and called 911, thank God. I tried to rise, an instinct born of 1,000 negative interactions with authority. Cops meant trouble for guys like me, loitering charges, vagrancy, public intoxication. Even when I'd done nothing wrong, which was most of the time, the uniform meant hassle. "You'll be okay now," I mumbled, struggling to my feet. "Help's coming! Wait!" she called, still clutching my hand. "Please don't go! You saved my life!" The blue and red lights appeared at the top of the embankment, casting bizarre shadows across the snowy ground. I hesitated, torn between flight and the genuine concern in her eyes. "What's your name?" she asked again, as if my earlier introduction had been lost in her semi-conscious state. "Daniel," I repeated. "I'm nobody." "I'm Sophia Harrington," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "And you're not nobody. You're the man who just saved my life, Harrington." The name registered dimly in my hypothermia-fogged brain. Harrington Towers. The building where I'd fallen. The accident that started my descent. Before I could process this bizarre coincidence, paramedics swarmed around us, their voices professionally urgent. They wrapped thermal blankets around our shoulders, checked vital signs, asked rapid-fire questions about injuries and allergies and medical conditions. I answered mechanically, already planning my exit. I'd done my good deed. The girl would be fine. I needed to get back to my spot under the bridge, salvage what I could of the night. But Sophia wouldn't let go of my hand, even as they loaded her onto a stretcher. "He saved me," she kept telling anyone who would listen. "He jumped into the river and pulled me out." The paramedics eyed me with new interest, taking in my ragged appearance, my unkempt beard, the dirt ground into my skin. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, gently suggested I come to the hospital too. "Severe hypothermia," she explained. You need warming protocols, monitoring. Your core temperature is dangerously low. I shook my head. I'll be fine. Sir, she persisted, you could die without treatment. I almost laughed. Death had been my shadow for 3 years now, always a few steps behind, waiting for that one night I couldn't find shelter, that one meal too many missed, that one infection left untreated. The police arrived next, 2 officers approaching cautiously, hands near their weapons, assessing the situation. One took statements from the paramedics, while the other approached me directly. You pulled her out? He asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes suspicious. Yes, officer. Can I see some ID? Of course. Even as a rescuer, I was first and foremost a suspect. Don't have any, I admitted. Lost my wallet a long time ago. He frowned. Name? Daniel Reeves. Current address? I gestured vaguely toward the bridge. Under there. His expression shifted slightly, not quite sympathy, but recognition. He dealt with homeless people before. Knew the drill. You witnessed the accident? Heard it, I corrected. Car skidded on the ice, hit the guardrail, went into the water. And you jumped in after it? In this weather? I shrugged, shivering beneath the thin thermal blanket. Someone had to. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. That was brave, Mr. Reeves. Before I could respond, a black Escalade screeched to a halt at the top of the embankment, its headlights illuminating the scene like a macabre stage play. The door flew open, and a tall man emerged, moving with purposeful strides down the slippery slope toward the cluster of emergency vehicles. Even from a distance, I recognized the expensive overcoat, the commanding posture, the silver hair, perfectly styled despite the hour and weather. Richard Harrington, the king of Boston real estate, the man whose company had fought my workers' comp claim until I'd given up in exhaustion and despair. "Sophia!" he shouted, his voice carrying easily over the wail of sirens and the howl of wind. "Sophia!" "Dad!" she cried from the stretcher, extending her arms toward him like a child. He reached her in seconds, embracing her tightly, heedless of her soaked clothing. "My God, are you hurt? When security called, said your car went off the bridge." His voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you." "I'm okay, Dad," she assured him, pulling back to look into his face. "Because of him." She pointed at me. He saved me. He jumped into the river and pulled me out of the car. Richard Harrington turned toward me, seeing me properly for the first time. I watched his expression cycle rapidly through confusion, disgust, and realization. This filthy vagrant had saved his precious daughter's life. "You," he began, then stopped, clearly reassessing what he'd been about to say. "You pulled my daughter from the river?" I nodded, uncomfortable under his scrutiny, his eyes so like his daughter's narrowed slightly as he took in my appearance, cataloguing the signs of long-term homelessness. "Get him in the car too," Harrington commanded his driver, a burly man in a dark suit who'd materialized at his employer's side. "He needs medical attention." "I'm fine," I protested. "You're hypothermic and probably half drowned," he countered, his tone making it clear he wasn't accustomed to having his orders questioned. "You're coming with us to Massachusetts General." I looked toward the bridge, toward my meager possessions. "My things," Harrington followed my gaze. "William," he addressed the driver, "retrieve the gentleman's belongings, all of them." He turned back to me. "They'll be waiting for you at the hospital." Before I could protest further, I was bundled into the back of the heated Escalade alongside Sophia on her stretcher and a grim-faced paramedic monitoring her vital signs. Richard Harrington climbed into the front passenger seat, immediately making calls on his cell phone. "Nathan? It's Richard. I need the best trauma team ready at Mass." General, in 10 minutes. Yes, it's Sophia. Car accident. No, she's conscious, but hypothermic. And I need another team for the man who saved her. Full workup, best care. I don't care what it costs or who you have to wake up. Make it happen. He ended the call and immediately placed another, his voice never betraying the panic that had been evident when he'd first arrived on the scene. This was a man accustomed to crisis, to command, to bending the world to his will through sheer force of personality and the immense power of his wealth. Beside me, Sophia had drifted into a light doze, her hand still somehow wrapped around mine. The paramedic, a young man with a military bearing, checked her pulse regularly, but seemed satisfied with her condition. "You did good," he told me quietly. Another few minutes in that water. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. The next hours passed in a blur. The emergency room at Mass General bustling despite the late hour. Doctors in crisp white coats issuing rapid orders. Nurses inserting IVs with practiced efficiency, warm saline flowing into my veins, gradually raising my core temperature. Blood draws, X-rays, a CT scan to check for internal injuries. Through it all, I remained strangely detached, as if watching someone else's life unfold. This level of medical attention was foreign to me. For 3 years, my healthcare had consisted of free clinics when absolutely necessary and stolen antibiotics from unlocked medicine cabinets when I could manage it. Sometime past midnight, a social worker appeared at my bedside, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a tablet computer and gentle eyes. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Margaret Winters from Patient Services. Do you feel up to answering a few questions?" I nodded warily. "You've indicated you have no fixed address. Are you currently staying in a shelter?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "St. Anthony's, when there's space. Otherwise I have spots around the city." She nodded, making notes. "Any family we can contact for you?" "No. My parents were long dead. My sister lived in Seattle with her husband and kids, but we hadn't spoken in years. After the 10th desperate phone call asking for money, relationships tend to fracture beyond repair." "Insurance?" I almost laughed. "No. We'll need to enroll you in the hospital's charity care program," she explained. "But given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any issues with coverage." She asked more questions. My employment history, my medical background, my military service, none. My history of substance abuse, extensive, but 2 years clean now, not that anyone would believe me. I answered honestly but minimally, too exhausted to craft more palatable lies. "Mr. Reeves," she said finally, setting down her tablet. "What you did tonight was extraordinary, but you're in a precarious situation. I'd like to connect you with our housing specialist. We may be able to—" "Ms. Winters," I interrupted gently, "I appreciate what you're trying to do. But I've been through the system before. The waiting lists for housing assistance are months long. The shelters are overcrowded and dangerous. The halfway houses want people with steady income. I'll be fine." She looked at me with the particular sadness of someone who's spent a career watching people fall through society's cracks. "At least take my card. Call me if you change your mind." I accepted the small rectangle of cardstock, knowing I'd lose it, or it would disintegrate in the next rainstorm. But the gesture mattered to her, so I tucked it into the pocket of the hospital scrubs they'd given me to replace my ruined clothes. After she left, I dozed fitfully, disturbed by the constant beeping of monitors and the squeaking of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. In my semi-conscious state, I dreamed of the river, of cold black water filling my lungs, of sinking endlessly into darkness. I awoke with a start to find Richard Harrington standing at the foot of my bed, his imposing figure silhouetted against the dim hospital lighting. He'd shed his overcoat but still wore an expensive-looking suit, though the tie had been loosened and the collar unbuttoned. He looked exhausted, but composed, Mr. Reeves, he said quietly. I hope I didn't wake you. I struggled to sit up, grimacing at the stiffness in my injured leg. It's fine. How's your daughter? Stable. They're keeping her overnight for observation. He moved to the side of the bed, hands clasped behind his back. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. Thanks to you, I shrugged uncomfortably. I just happened to be there. You happened to be there, he agreed. And then you chose to risk your life to save a stranger. That's not nothing, Mr. Reeves. Daniel, I said. Just Daniel is fine. Daniel, he nodded. I'm Richard Harrington. I know who you are. The words came out more bitter than I'd intended. If he noticed my tone, he gave no indication. I don't know how to thank you, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. If you hadn't been there... I looked away, unable to bear the raw gratitude in his eyes. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. He cleared his throat. I want to help you, whatever you need. Money, a place to stay, a job. Name it. The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. I studied his face, this titan of industry with his perfect teeth and manicured hands. For a moment, I imagined saying yes, taking his money, starting over, clean clothes, regular meals, a roof that didn't leak, a life reclaimed from the wreckage, but something inside me resisted. Pride, maybe, or fear, or the simple knowledge that charity, however well-intentioned, always comes with invisible strings. I don't need anything, I said, quietly. Harrington frowned, clearly not expecting this response. Everyone needs something, he insisted. Please, let me help you like you helped my daughter. How could I explain to this man, this billionaire who'd never missed a meal, never slept on concrete, never been invisible to every passing face, that his help might destroy the last fragile remnant of my self-respect? That sometimes the weight of gratitude is heavier than the burden of need? I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Maybe we can talk tomorrow. Harrington hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow then. Get some rest, Daniel. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said without looking. Back. What you did tonight. It was more than brave. It was human, in the best sense of the word. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the steady beep of monitors and the weight of choices I wasn't ready to make. Sleep claimed me eventually, a deep, dreamless unconsciousness born of physical and emotional exhaustion. When I woke, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the window blinds, casting striped shadows across the institutional green linoleum. A nurse, different from the night shift, checked my vitals with brisk efficiency. Temperature's normal, she announced cheerfully. Doctor will be by soon to discharge you. My clothes? I asked, looking around the sterile room. There's a package for you at the nurse's station, she replied, making a notation on my chart. Mr. Harrington sent it over early this morning. An hour later, I stood in the hospital bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The man, looking back, was a stranger, clean-shaven courtesy of the disposable razor in the patient care kit, hair wet from a thorough washing in the shower. The bruises from my impact with the water were beginning to bloom across my chest and shoulders, purple-black against pale skin. The package from Harrington had turned out to be an entire wardrobe. Jeans, thermal undershirt, flannel button-down, thick wool socks, sturdy boots, a down jacket with tags still attached. All in the correct sizes, all from brands I'd never been able to afford, even when I was working regularly. My old clothes were nowhere to be found. Neither was my backpack or sleeping bag, despite Harrington's promise to have them retrieved. The message was clear. The old Daniel Reeves was to be discarded along with his ragged possessions, a clean slate, whether I'd asked for one or not. I dressed slowly, my body still aching from the previous night's ordeal. The clothes felt foreign against my skin, too new, too clean, too much like a costume I hadn't earned the right to wear. When I emerged from the bathroom, the doctor was waiting, a harried-looking woman in her 40s who barely glanced up from her tablet as she delivered discharge instructions. Rest for the next 48 hours, no strenuous activity. Watch for signs of secondary drowning, difficulty breathing, persistent cough, extreme fatigue. Follow up with a primary care physician if symptoms develop. She paused, finally looking at me directly. Do you have a primary care doctor? No, she nodded, unsurprised. There's a clinic on Harrison Avenue that takes walk-ins. Ask for Dr. Powell. Tell him Dr. Chen sent you. She handed me a prescription. Antibiotics, that river water is filthy. Take all of them, even if you feel fine. I pocketed the prescription, knowing I had no way to fill it. Thank you. Thank you, she replied with unexpected warmth. What you did was remarkable. She hesitated, then added, The pharmacy downstairs has your medication waiting. It's been paid for. Before I could respond, she was gone, already focused on her next patient. At the nurse's station, I collected my discharge papers and the small paper bag containing my antibiotics. As I turned to leave, the unit secretary called out, Mr. Reeves, there's someone waiting for you in the lobby. My heart sank. Harrington. I wasn't ready for another conversation about gratitude and obligation and the price of a human life, but when I reached the lobby, it wasn't Richard Harrington waiting by the automatic doors. It was his driver, William, the burly, silent man from the night before. He straightened when he saw me, his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Reeves. Mr. Harrington sent me to drive you wherever you'd like to go. I hesitated. St. Anthony's. Wouldn't open for day services for another hour. My spot under the bridge held nothing for me now. Whatever possessions I'd left behind would have been scavenged or ruined by the sleet. I had nowhere to be, nowhere to go. I'm fine walking, I said finally. William's expression didn't change. Mr. Harrington was quite insistent, sir. I recognized the immovable object when I saw one. Fine, Boston Common then. William nodded and led the way outside to where the black Escalade idled at the curb, its exhaust creating white clouds in the frigid morning air. He opened the rear door for me with practiced deference. The luxury of the vehicle's interior struck me anew in the daylight. Buttery leather seats, polished wood trim, the subtle scent of expensive cologne lingering in the climate-controlled air. I sat stiffly, uncomfortable in this space, so contrary to my existence for the past 3 years. As we pulled away from the hospital, William spoke again, his eyes meeting mine briefly in the rearview mirror. Mr. Harrington asked me to inform you that he's reserved a suite for you at the Four Seasons, just until, as he put it, we get you situated. I stared out the window at Boston sliding past, the gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district, the historic brick facades of Beacon Hill, the leafless trees of the public garden frosted with ice from last night's storm. This city had been both home and prison to me, a place of memory and misery in equal measure. Why is he doing this? I asked, the question directed more at myself than at William. To my surprise, he answered, Because you saved his daughter's life, he said simply, as if it explained everything. Perhaps to him it did. "Take me to the Four Seasons, then," I said after a long moment. William nodded, turning the vehicle smoothly toward the hotel. "Very good, sir." As we drove, I wondered what exactly I was getting myself into. What unseen calculations were being made, what debts were accruing with each mile. I had saved a life, yes, but at what cost to my own? The Four Seasons rose before us. A monument. To luxury I'd passed 100 times, but never imagined entering. As William pulled under the portico, a valet rushed forward to open my door. The young man's eyes widened slightly at my appearance. The new clothes couldn't quite disguise the hollowness in my cheeks, the wariness in my eyes, the ingrained dirt beneath my fingernails. "Welcome to the Four Seasons, sir," he said, recovering. Quickly, I stepped out onto the immaculate pavement, painfully conscious of the vast gulf between this world and the one I'd inhabited just 24 hours earlier. The doorman, resplendent in a long coat with brass buttons, ushered me inside with a deferential nod. The lobby enveloped me in warmth and understated opulence, marble floors, crystal chandelier, fresh flower arrangements, taller than a child. The desk clerk, a poised young woman with an impeccable smile, greeted me as if I belonged there. "Mr. Reeves, we've been expecting you. Mr. Harrington has arranged everything." Of course he had. The man commanded the world around him like a conductor leads an orchestra, with absolute authority and the expectation of perfect execution. She handed me a keycard in a leather folder. "Suite 1217, the elevator is to your right. Is there anything else you need?" I shook my head, momentarily speechless at the surreal turn my life had taken. The elevator ascended silently, its mirrored walls reflecting a man I barely recognized. The 12th floor corridor was hushed, the thick carpet absorbing all sound. I found my suite at the end of the hall, the key card opening the door with a soft click. I stepped into another world entirely. The suite was larger than the apartment I'd lost 3 years ago, elegantly furnished in neutral tones with occasional splashes of rich blue. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, the water glittering in the winter sunlight. A dining table set for two occupied one corner. A massive bed dominated the separate bedroom, turned down invitingly. On the coffee table sat a basket containing fruit, chocolates, and a bottle of expensive-looking scotch. A handwritten note propped against it read simply, "With deepest gratitude, R.H." I moved through the space like a man in a dream, touching nothing, afraid I might shatter the illusion. In the marble bathroom I found toiletries arranged neatly. On the counter, razor, shaving cream, toothbrush, cologne. In the closet hung more clothes, all in my size, slacks, shirts, a blazer, even a pair of leather shoes. It was too much. Too perfect, too calculated. I returned to the main room and sank onto the edge of the plush sofa, my head in my hands. What was Harrington playing at? What did he expect in return for this extravagant gesture? And why did it make me feel not grateful, but diminished somehow, reduced from a man who had performed an act of courage to a charity case to be managed? The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. I crossed to the desk and lifted the receiver. "Mr. Reeves?" The front desk clerk's voice was professionally cheerful. "Mr. Harrington has arranged for room service to deliver whatever you'd like, whenever you'd like it. Would you care to order something now?" My stomach growled loudly, reminding me I hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. Yes, thank you," I ordered simply. "Soup, sandwich, coffee?" Though I could have requested anything on the extensive menu she recited. When the food arrived 15 minutes later, delivered by a waiter in a crisp uniform who refused to accept a tip, what tip could I have offered anyway? I devoured it, standing at the window, watching boats navigate the harbor below. The simple meal, French onion soup with melted Gruyere, a club sandwich on toasted artisanal bread, was the finest thing I'd eaten in years. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to think about the lean months, the missed meals, the nights I'd gone to sleep with hunger as my only companion. After eating, exhaustion overtook me again. The events of the past day, the rescue, the hospital, this bizarre change in circumstances had drained what little reserves I possessed. I lay down on the bed fully clothed, intending to rest for just a moment. I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness, the digital clock read 3:17 a.m. I lay still, listening to the absolute silence of the hotel room. No traffic noise, no arguing couples, no rats scurrying in walls, none of the soundtrack of poverty that had accompanied my nights for so long. I rose and moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtains. Boston sprawled before me, a constellation of lights against the black backdrop of night. Somewhere out there, people huddled in doorways and under bridges, fighting the cold with whatever resources they could muster. People like the man I'd been yesterday. The disparity made me dizzy. How quickly fortunes could change, a moment's decision, a hand extended in the darkness, a life saved. And now this, warmth, safety, comfort beyond imagining. But for how long? And at what price? I showered again, the novelty of unlimited hot water still wondrous, and dressed in clean clothes from the closet. Then I sat in the armchair by the window and watched the city slowly wake as dawn crept across the harbour, painting the water gold and pink and finally blue. At precisely 8 a.m. the phone rang again. I answered it, expecting the front desk clerk with another offer of food. "Daniel?" The voice was female, young, familiar. "It's Sophia Harrington." Sophia. Her name felt strange in my mouth, intimate somehow. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said. "Still a little shaky, but the doctors say I'm fine. No lasting damage." She paused. "I'm calling to thank you again. What you did, jumping into that river, I can't even imagine the courage that took." I shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she replied, firmly. "They wouldn't. The police told me no one else even stopped their cars. Just drove right past a broken guardrail without calling 911. You're the only one who helped." Another pause. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," I said automatically. "I disagree. So does my father." Her tone lightened. "Speaking of whom, he wanted me to invite you to dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just at our home. Will you come?" The request caught me off guard. I'd expected money, perhaps, or some grand public gesture of gratitude, not a dinner invitation like I was a friend or colleague. "I don't think—" "Please," she interrupted. "It would mean a lot to me, to both of us." How could I refuse the woman whose life I'd saved? "All right," I conceded. "What time?" 7. "Dad's sending William to pick you up at 6:30. She rattled off an address in Beacon Hill, then added, "Wear whatever you're comfortable in. It's really just a family dinner." After we hung up, I paced the hotel's suite, anxiety gnawing at my stomach. A family dinner with one of Boston's wealthiest families. What was I supposed to talk about? What fork was I supposed to use? The gap between their world and mine yawned wider by the minute. I spent the day in a strange limbo, alternating between luxuriating in the hotel's amenities, ordering room service, watching cable TV, soaking in the deep bathtub, and feeling like an imposter about to be exposed. Several times I nearly called down to cancel the evening's plans, but something stopped me each time, perhaps simple curiosity, perhaps the need for closure. At 6 o'clock, I began preparing. I showered again, shaved carefully, and dressed in the most conservative outfit from the closet: dark jeans, a navy button-down shirt, a charcoal blazer that fit suspiciously well. The leather shoes pinched my feet, unaccustomed as they were to anything but boots or sneakers, but I endured the discomfort. The man in the mirror looked respectable, employable, almost like the Daniel Reeves of 4 years ago, before the fall, before the pills, before the spiral into oblivion. But his eyes gave him away, too wary, too weighed down by experience, too aware of how quickly it could all be lost again. At precisely 6:30, the phone rang. William was waiting in the lobby. The drive to Beacon Hill took less than 15 minutes, but it might as well have been a journey to another planet. The Harrington residence, a 5-story brownstone on one of the neighborhood's most exclusive streets, was lit up against the early darkness, warm yellow light spilling from tall windows onto the snow-covered sidewalk. William led me to the front door, which opened before he could knock. A grey-haired woman in a simple black dress, a housekeeper, I guessed, greeted us with a professional smile. "Mr. Reeves, welcome. Mr. Harrington and Miss Sophia are in the living room. May I take your coat?" I surrendered the down jacket, fighting the irrational fear that without it I'd be vulnerable to the elements again. She led me through a foyer of gleaming hardwood and antique furniture, down a hallway lined with what looked like original artwork, and into a spacious living room dominated by a massive fireplace where real logs crackled and spat. Richard Harrington rose from a leather armchair as I entered, extending his hand in greeting. He looked more relaxed than at the hospital, dressed in camel-coloured slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I'd made in a month as a construction worker. "Daniel," he said warmly, clasping my hand in a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrington." "Richard, please." He gestured toward a young woman curled up on the sofa. "You already know Sophia, of course." She smiled and stood, looking remarkably recovered from her ordeal. In jeans and an oversized cream sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, she seemed younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps just out of college. "It's good to see you again," she said, stepping forward to embrace me briefly. "Under better circumstances." The housekeeper materialized with a tray of drinks. "Scotch for you, Mr. Harrington, white wine for Miss Sophia."
"And for Mr. Reeves?" "The same as me, Mrs. Collins," Harrington instructed. "The Macallan?" 25. I accepted the crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching the firelight. It had been a long time since I'd had a drink, alcohol and homelessness.
Don't mix well, and after the pills I'd been wary of any substance that might dull my senses or control. But one glass wouldn't hurt, and refusing felt somehow impolite. "To second chances," Harrington proposed, raising his glass. I wasn't sure if he meant Sophia's second chance at life or my second chance at whatever this was. Either way, I clinked my glass against his and took a small sip. The scotch was exquisite, warming my throat and chest as it went down. For the next hour, we engaged in what passed for casual conversation, mostly Harrington and Sophia, drawing me out with gentle questions about my background, my interests, my former work. I kept my answers vague, skimming over the darker chapters of my recent past. They didn't press. In turn, I learned that Sophia was indeed just out of college, Dartmouth, with a degree in environmental science, and was working at a non-profit, focused on clean water access in developing countries. The irony of nearly drowning when her life's work centered on water wasn't lost on any of us. "It was just horrible timing," she explained, as Mrs. Collins announced dinner was ready. I was driving home from a late meeting. The road seemed fine until I hit that patch of black ice on the bridge. Then the car just went sideways. She shuddered at the memory. Everything happened so fast after that. Harrington placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder as we moved to the dining room. "Let's leave that behind us," he suggested gently. "You're safe. That's what matters." The dining room continued the home's theme of understated luxury, a gleaming mahogany table set for three with fine china, crystal, and silver. Fresh flowers arranged artfully in the center. I paused in the doorway, overwhelmed by the contrast between this tableau and the many meals I'd eaten from dumpsters or on shelter trays. "Is something wrong?" Sophia asked, noticing my hesitation. I forced a smile. "Not at all, it's lovely." Dinner was a masterpiece of quiet extravagance. Roasted rack of lamb, fingerling potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, fresh bread, still warm from the oven. I ate carefully, hyper-aware of my table manners, while Harrington kept the conversation flowing with questions about my construction experience, my knowledge of Boston's architecture, my opinion on the city's building boom. It was strange to talk about these things again, to be treated as a person with valuable knowledge and perspectives, rather than a problem to be managed or an obstacle to be avoided. Stranger still to be sitting in this rarefied environment just 2 days after huddling under a bridge, fighting for survival. The cognitive dissonance must have shown on my face because Sophia asked softly, "Are you all right, Daniel?" "You seem distant." I set down my fork, suddenly unable to continue the charade of normalcy. "I'm sorry. This is all just a lot to process." Harrington studied me over the rim of his wine glass. "I can only imagine how disorienting this must be for you." "Why am I here?" I asked bluntly. "Really?" Sophia looked startled by my directness, but Harrington merely nodded as if he'd been expecting the question. "Because we owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid," he said simply. "My daughter is everything to me. Without you, she would be gone." His voice caught slightly on the last word. "I want to help you, Daniel. Not out of pity or obligation, but out of genuine gratitude." "I don't want to be a charity case," I said, the words coming out more harshly than I'd intended. "That's not how I see you at all," he countered. "What I see is a man of extraordinary courage and capability who's fallen on hard times. The kind
of man who deserves a second chance." The rest of the meal passed in uneasy detente, with Harrington skillfully steering the conversation towards safer topics. By the time Mrs. Collins served coffee and a decadent chocolate dessert I barely touched, I was exhausted from the emotional strain of navigating this unfamiliar social terrain. As we returned to the living room, Harrington excused himself briefly. "Business call I need to take. Won't be a moment." Sophia and I sat in awkward silence for several seconds before she spoke. "He means well, you know. He's not good at expressing emotions directly, but what happened? It shook him to his core." "Understand," I said. "He loves you very much." "He does?" She smiled sadly. "Almost too much sometimes. He's been overprotective since my mother died when I was 12. Cancer," she added, answering my unasked question. "After that, it was just the two of us against the world. At least, that's how he sees it." Before I could respond, Harrington returned, looking pleased about something. "Sorry about that. Unavoidable." He took his seat across from me and leaned forward, hands clasped. "Daniel, before you go, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." Here it comes, I thought. The real reason for the dinner, the agenda behind the hospitality. "I've been thinking about how to properly thank you," he continued. "I know you're uncomfortable with charity, and I respect that. So I've taken a different approach.
He reached for a folder I hadn't noticed on the side table and opened it. I've set up a trust fund in your name. $500,000. It's yours. No strings attached. You can use it however you see fit. Education, housing, starting a business, whatever you want. I stared at him, speechless. And he pressed on, clearly warming to his topic. I've spoken with my friend at Boston Construction. They're willing to offer you a position, starting salary of $70,000, full benefits. With your experience, you'd be a project supervisor, not working
on the dangerous stuff anymore.
Sophia was beaming, watching her father with obvious pride. Isn't that wonderful, Daniel? Harrington produced a pen from his pocket. All I need is for you to tell me what bank to transfer the money to, he concluded, clearly pleased with himself. What do you say? The room fell silent, both Harringtons watching me expectantly. I stared at my hands, my mind racing. $500,000, a job, a chance to start over, everything I should want, but all I could think about was how these people were looking at me, not as a person, but as a charity case. Their good deed for the year. The homeless man they saved. The magnitude of their generosity should have warmed me. Instead, it made me feel smaller somehow, reduced to a problem they could solve with their wealth and connections. A transaction, not a transformation. Mr. Harrington, I said finally, my voice unexpectedly steady. I appreciate the offer, but
I can't accept it. Sophia's smile faltered. Harrington frowned, clearly not expecting this response. Daniel, he said, setting down the pen.
You don't understand. This money could change your life. I understand perfectly, I replied. And I'm grateful. But that's not what I want. Then what do you want? He asked, genuinely perplexed. Just name it. I stood up, needing the physical separation to gather my thoughts. Through the window, I could see the Boston skyline glittering against the night sky, the same city where I'd nearly frozen to death countless times, where I'd been ignored and vilified and erased. The same city where I'd once had a life, a purpose, a place. Tomorrow, I said, turning back to face them, I'll be just another homeless man to most people in this city. They'll cross the street to avoid me. They'll pretend they don't see me asking for help. They'll assume I'm drunk or high or crazy. Harrington started to protest, but I held up my hand. Please, let me finish. What you're offering? The money?
The job, it comes from a good place. I know that, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem. Which is? Sophia asked softly. I took a deep breath.
The day before yesterday, I was worthless in the eyes of society. Today, because I saved you, I'm suddenly worthy of all this. I gestured around the elegant room. But I'm the same person I was 3 days ago. The only thing that's changed
is your perception of me. The room went silent. No one said a word. I don't want your money, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I don't want your pity. What happened under that bridge? I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because Sophia needed help. I looked around the table at the stunned faces. 3
years ago, I was like any of you. I had a job, a home. Then I got hurt on a construction site, got hooked on painkillers, lost everything. Not one person looked me in the eye after that. Not one person treated me like a human being. I turned back to Harrington. You want to help me? Don't give me money. Give me a chance to earn it back. Myself. Not because I saved your daughter, but because I deserve that chance, just like anyone else. The silence deepened. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I'll take that job, I said. But at the regular starting salary, whatever that is, and I'll find my own apartment. Something I can afford on what I earn. Sophia was the first to react. Tears streaming down her face, she stood and started clapping. Slowly, her father rose to join her. But I wasn't interested in their applause or approval. I'd said what I needed to say. The rest was up to them. I just stood up, buttoned my shirt, and left without looking back. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support
means everything.